Today we are talking about the forgotten princess, Myrcella Baratheon, and how she is going to be very important in The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. I was doing some research for my video on how House Ironwood represent the Tudors in A Song of Ice and Fire when I came across something significant. Myrcella Baratheon and Jane Grey have the same coat of arms, a yellow or white lion rampant on a field of scarlet. The colour of the grey lion seems to be interchangeable, so I'm going ahead with it, and after doing some more research on the subject, there were too many parallels between the two young women to simply dismiss. You might be wondering at this point who the Lady Jane Grey is, and though she was not around for very long, she was extremely important for a short time. The Lady Jane Grey was the fiercely intelligent eldest daughter of Henry Grey, the Duke of Suffolk, and his wife Frances Brandon. She was also the great-great-granddaughter of Henry VII. The Lady Jane Grey was treasonously proclaimed queen after the death of her cousin Edward VI, but tragically she only reigned for 9 days. Jane was overthrown by her cousin, the rightful Queen Mary I, and though Jane Grey was the first woman to be proclaimed queen in England in her own right, nobody remembers her. She was executed soon after Mary came to the throne, at the tender age of 16. It is said she went to her execution bravely. I believe Myrcella's fate will mirror that of the tragic Jane Grey, and I have seen many similarities leading me to this conclusion, including the coat of arms similarity. Jane Grey was renowned before she became queen for her fierce intelligence, and Myrcella is also known to be very smart. She displays this in A Feast for Crows when she immediately takes to Cyvasse and starts beating Prince Trystane on a regular basis.
He had left her in her chambers, bent over a gaming table opposite Prince Trystane, pushing ornate pieces across squares of jade, carnelian, and lapis lazuli. Myrcella's full lips had been slightly parted, her green eyes narrowed with concentration. Cyvasse the game was called. Prince Trystane had taken to the game at once, and Myrcella had learned it so she could play with him. She was not quite 1 in 10, her betrothed 3 in 10. Even so, she had been winning more often than not of late. Trystane did not seem to mind.
However, Myrcella and the Lady Jane Grey have a lot more in common though than them simply both being intelligent, well-educated young women. Both girls have 2 siblings. Myrcella has Tommen and Joffrey, and Jane has 2 sisters, Catherine and Mary. But the slightly more important fact is that Jane's youngest sister Mary was a dwarf, who was despised by her parents Henry and Frances due to her medical condition and traumatic birth. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like our favourite character, Tyrion Lannister, and his relationships with Cersei and Tywin? The Lady Jane Grey was reportedly always kind to her youngest sister, and I believe this relationship is mirrored in the way Tyrion and Myrcella interact.
Myrcella came running after her brother, and the dwarf picked her up by the waist and spun her in a circle, squealing. When he lowered her back to the ground, the little man kissed her lightly on the brow and came waddling across the yard toward Joffrey. "I'm glad you're not dead," said Princess Myrcella.
Tyrion even considered crowning Myrcella for a while, because he was always fond of her, and she was always kind to him. But in the end Tyrion decides not to crown Myrcella, because he knows it would be her death sentence. But more than once he thinks back fondly on Myrcella, and is thankful that she is nothing like her mother.
She had all of her mother's beauty, and none of her nature.
Let us not forget that both Myrcella and Jane have very ambitious mothers, who are both well known for being needlessly cruel. When Frances Brandon told Jane that she was to marry Guilford Dudley, Jane refused. Jane's refusal to marry made Frances so angry she swore at Jane and slapped her across the face. When that did not convince Jane to agree to the marriage, Frances gave Jane a brutal whipping until the girl capitulated and wed. Cersei is also well known for having people whipped. There is Alalaya, who Cersei has whipped to punish Tyrion, and more importantly there is Pate, Tommen's whipping boy, who Cersei repeatedly has beaten to make Tommen capitulate with her wishes. Myrcella and Jane are also both largely forgotten about until they are innocents used in rebellious plots. Jane is used by her father-in-law, John Dudley, and Myrcella is used by her sister-in-law, Arianne Martell. Do you see a pattern emerging? Myrcella is also betrothed to Tristan Martell, a boy of a similar age, which is a little uncommon in a medieval world where girls with royal blood can get married to men twice their age with no one batting an eye. And Jane is also married to Guilford Dudley, who is only a year or two older than herself. Both marriages were also arranged to cement alliances between families. Also, let's not forget that Myrcella herself and many others believe herself to be a Baratheon, and therefore the great-great-granddaughter of a Targaryen princess on that side. And Jane Grey's grandmother was a Tudor princess, so the parallels continue. Arianne Martell seems to have given up all hope of crowning Myrcella, but I think the Sand Snakes are playing the long game and might try to cement another rebellion during the chaos that will follow Cersei blowing up the Great Sept of Baelor. This new plot will focus on using religious fervor to crown Myrcella. Religion, of course, was the main reason for crowning Jane Grey. If the Sand Snakes succeed in having Myrcella crowned Queen Regnant, she will be, like Jane Grey, the first woman to officially rule in her own right. But also, like Jane Grey, I believe Myrcella's reign will be short, and she will be overthrown by Daenerys Targaryen, who will go down in history as Daenerys I, in a true parallel to Mary I, better known as Bloody Mary, which would also mirror the books, if they followed the TV show at all. Mary I agonized for months about putting her cousin Jane Grey to death, and Daenerys may find herself in a similar predicament. Jane Grey went to her beheading bravely, and we know from the books Myrcella is brave.
The truth was, the princess was braver than her brother, and brighter and more confident as well. Her wits were quicker, her courtesies were more polished. Nothing daunted her, not even Joffrey.
I believe the formal putting to death of Princess Myrcella Baratheon will turn the King's Landing crowd against Daenerys, and cause her eventual spiral and the burning of the city. I believe we got a foreshadowing of this when Myrcella took her leave for Dorne, and the crowd, on the way back to the Red Keep, attacked Joffrey and the leaving party.
The girl never wept. Young as she was, Myrcella Baratheon was a princess born, and a Lannister despite her name. Tyrion reminded himself as much Jaime's blood as Cersei's. To be sure, her smile was a shade tremulous when her brothers took their leave of her on the deck of the Sea Swift, but the girl knew the proper words to say, and she said them with courage and dignity. When the time came to part, it was Prince Tommen who cried and Myrcella who gave him comfort.
Could the scene I just quoted above be a final farewell from this world? And both scenes will be witnessed by Tyrion, book-ending Myrcella Baratheon's short life, and ending with Tyrion reflecting on how true it was that to crown her was to kill her. You might be wondering at this point about Myrcella's look-alike cousin Rosamund, and where she fits into my theory, as everyone likes to talk about Rosamund a lot and has their own theories about who it was that Darkstar really attacked. I believe it was Rosamund in the Arianne Rebellion, and that Myrcella remains safe and unharmed. My reason for thinking this is simple. The name Rosamund is of Germanic origin, and it means horse protection. And where was the supposed Myrcella injured? On horseback, of course. So I believe Rosamund Lannister is nothing more than a red herring put into the story by George R.R. Martin to try and distract us, because we all know how much emphasis George R.R. Martin puts on his name meanings for his characters. On the subject of names and the importance George R.R. Martin puts on them when it comes to creating his characters, I feel it is very important to point out the meaning of the name Myrcella. Myrcella is a variant of the Latin name Marcella, which means warlike, and doesn't that tell you everything you need to know about Princess Myrcella Baratheon and her storyline in A Song of Ice and Fire? Until we get the Winds of Winter, we can only continue to speculate. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my other A Song of Ice and Fire content. I have a couple of videos covering Dorne, and quite a few covering Winterfell and Sansa Stark. Also, leave a comment on your thoughts on Myrcella Baratheon. Do you see the parallels with the Jane Grey story? And where do you think Rosamund is going to turn up? Until next time, remember, a Lannister always pays his debts.